April 3rd, 1943, near Maknassi, central Tunisia. The desert wind screamed past his cockpit like a banshee. 19-year-old Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, fresh from Kansas wheat fields and flight school barracks, gripped the stick of his P-47 Thunderbolt so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. Below him, in the sun-bleached valley, panzer tanks crawled toward a ravine, where 800 American infantrymen waited, trapped. From his headset a voice barked, "Abort! Do not engage! Repeat, do not engage!" Jack didn't answer. He rolled the Thunderbolt over and dove straight into hell. He had no authorization, no experience, no backup. And in that one reckless act, he crushed a German armored assault. But no one knew that yet. Not even him. March 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The Germans were laughing. Weeks earlier, at Kasserine, they had watched the American lines buckle like wet plywood. Green units folded. Radios crackled in confusion. Sherman tanks flared like matchboxes under 88mm fire. To the veterans of the Africa Corps, it confirmed what they already believed. The Americans were amateurs, soft, undisciplined, slow to react. Colonel Klaus Richter of the 10th Panzer Division said it best in his report. They have equipment, yes, but no teeth. Their pilots fly like they're drunk. Their infantry march without cohesion. The German officers toasted to that arrogance over schnapps and black bread in makeshift headquarters just outside Sfax. The plan was simple. Punch through the Maknassi line, crush the scattered American regiments, and reclaim the initiative in central Tunisia. The Americans would retreat. Again. Same week, 10th Panzer briefing tent, east of Gafsa. The map was littered with unit markers. The ravine west of Maknassi, an unremarkable ditch carved by seasonal floods, now housed 2 battalions of the U.S. 45th Infantry, exposed, vulnerable. "We'll herd them there," Major Brandt muttered, gesturing with a gloved finger, "and finish them with artillery and armor." Beside him, Luftwaffe liaison officers smirked. American air cover was patchy at best. Thunderbolts were loud, fast, and mostly inaccurate. Their pilots feared low-altitude runs. "They dive, we shoot," one said coldly. "They're brave, but stupid." Meanwhile, 3rd Air Squadron Camp, 40 miles west. Jack Reynolds tied his boots in silence. Around him, veteran pilots chain-smoked and swapped dirty jokes, flipping coins to see who'd survive the next sortie. They barely noticed him anymore. "Hey, Kansas," someone called out. "Try not to wet yourself if you see flak." He smiled politely. It didn't bother him. Jack wasn't there to be liked. He was there to fly. He had enlisted in June 1942, just days after graduating from a high school that smelled of chalk and corn sweat. His dad was a mechanic. His mom, a post office clerk. He had never seen an ocean, a city, or a war. But he could pull an engine apart blindfolded and calculate bombing angles like poetry. He had passed flight school in half the required time, not because he was a prodigy, but because the war needed pilots more than perfection. The instructors liked him, quiet, obedient. Which is why, after just 98 hours of flight time, he was assigned to North Africa, with one very clear order: observe. Never engage without command clearance. April 2nd, 1943. Briefing tent, Route 12. Recon mission. "You are not a cowboy," the squadron commander growled. "You are not John Wayne. You are not to improvise." He pointed directly at Jack. "Especially you, Reynolds. We've already lost 3 birds this week. You're here to spot armor, maintain altitude, no dives. Jack nodded. So did everyone else. The orders were clear. But orders don't always survive the first scream over the radio. McNassy Ravine, on the ground, private. Earl McKinley clutched his carbine and whispered a prayer. He was from Alabama. Had a baby girl back home he hadn't seen yet. The ravine was too quiet. No birds, no wind. Then came the rumble. Deep, mechanical, final. Panzers. Dozens. And above, just a speck in the sky, a single thunderbolt circling in lazy arcs. Back in the cockpit, April the 3rd, 1943, 1100 hours. Jack squinted against the sun. Dust, movement, columns of armor heading straight for the ravine. He reached for the radio, switched channels, and heard it, screaming, gunfire. "They're in the hills! We're boxed in! For God's sake, where's our air?" He froze. The voice, it was McKinley. The same kid who had once handed him a Coca-Cola after a botched fuel stop. The same kid who joked about naming his daughter Victory. Below, Jack saw dust trails, too many for a simple patrol. He saw the truth. But he also heard the command repeating in his headset, "Do not engage. Return to base." His thumb hovered over the mic. His eyes didn't blink. The ravine was about to become a grave. And he still had 2,000 pounds of bombs strapped under his wings. April 3rd, 1943, 10th Panzer Division, Forward Recon Post, Tunisia. Sergeant Eric Voss pressed binoculars to his face. Sweat rolled down from his brow, stinging his eyes. Something was off. From this ridge, he should have had a clear view of the American retreat route. He should have seen chaos. Infantry breaking lines, tanks reversing course, smoke signals in the sky. But there was nothing. Silent. Too silent. He adjusted his focus. Dust trails. South of the ravine. But not fast enough to be a withdrawal. And then, far above, a single dot moved against the sun. A thunderbolt. Alone. Circling. Watching. Eric exhaled sharply. He knew the Americans had aircraft, but they rarely flew solo. This one was flying low. Too low for standard recon. He tapped the radio handset. Enemy air unit spotted. Position uncertain. Recommend alerting flak teams. The reply came back with a chuckle. One plane? Let him watch. He won't do anything. Back in the P-47, 10,000 feet above ground, Jack Reynolds narrowed his gaze. He had logged enemy armor formations in his notebook for weeks, watched how they staggered tanks, where they placed their fuel trucks, how they clustered command vehicles just behind the second wave. And now, below him, the Germans had made a fatal mistake. They bunched too tightly in the valley mouth, Panzer IV's nose to tail, boxed between rock walls, believing the ravine was secure. A single well-placed strike could shatter their lead elements, block the advance, trap the entire column. Jack's breath hitched. His training screamed, "Wait for confirmation." His instinct whispered, "They won't survive if you do." His hand hovered near the bomb release switch. He could almost feel McKinley's voice vibrating through the cockpit glass. "Where the hell is our air?" On the ground, German Panzer crew, 1.5 kilometers from American lines. Obergefreiter Helmut Kramer sat atop his Panzer Me-4, swatting flies. They had stopped again, bottlenecked in the narrow pass. The driver muttered, "Fuel trucks stuck in the bend." Helmut didn't care. They'd be through in an hour. The Americans always ran. He looked up lazily, saw the thunderbolt overhead. He smiled. Fools don't dive alone. Then came a sound that didn't belong. A deep, rising growl. The thunderbolt wasn't circling anymore. It was descending. Fast, too fast, and for the first time that day, someone in the German ranks whispered, "That's not right." April 3rd, 1943, 11:11 a.m. Maknassi Ravine, Tunisia. Inside the ravine, Private Earl McKinley crouched behind a broken jeep axle, bullets whining overhead like hornets. Smoke choked the sky. Dust burned his eyes. Around him, men scrambled for cover that didn't exist. A mortar round cratered the edge of the ridge, tossing earth and bone into the air. The radios were near silent now, just static and clipped shouts from scattered platoons. The artillery net was dead. Air support wasn't answering. "They're coming through the pass!" someone screamed. "We're cut off. They're flanking. God help us." McKinley looked up. Just once. The P-47 was still there. Just one. Hovering like a vulture. Or maybe a guardian angel that hadn't made up its mind. He whispered, "Come on, just drop something." German forward armor, valley mouth, 400 yards from the ravine. Panzers rumbled forward, metal groaning under tension. A tiger. I led the column, its commander scanning the terrain through optics that glinted in the sun. "Infantry resistance ahead, light," he muttered. "No artillery. Push through." Behind them, fuel trucks stalled, one stuck in a depression caused by last night's rain. The narrow road had become a bottleneck. And above, that single thunderbolt still loomed. The flak team was sleeping. In the sky, Jack Reynolds' cockpit. His altimeter ticked downward, 9,800 feet, 9,600. Every nerve screamed against what he was about to do. He had no wingman, no ground confirmation, no clearance, no margin for error. But through his canopy, he saw McKinley, saw the chaos, the rising smoke. The outline of an American flag burned at the edge of a ruined supply tent. "They're dead if I don't." Jack gritted his teeth. He pressed the mic. "This is Reynolds, confirming visual on enemy armor, column exposed, requesting immediate strike authority." Silence. Then, "Negative, Reynolds. Return to base. That's an order." He stared at the switch, then switched frequencies. "Ground unit, this is Reynolds. Can you hear me?" Static. Then a broken voice, McKinley's. "We see you, Kansas. For God's sake, help us." That was it. The moment broke. German perspective. Forward observer team. The Luftwaffe liaison narrowed his binoculars. Why hasn't he turned? A second observer snapped up his field glasses. The Thunderbolt had dipped below 5,000 feet. "That's a dive profile." The officer's eyes widened. "He's not observing. He's attacking." The air cracked. The P-47 howled downward. And in the German comm channel, one voice muttered, what none dared say aloud. "We're exposed." And just before the first bomb left the belly of the Thunderbolt, Jack whispered 3 words to no one but himself. "Forgive me, sir." April 3rd, 1943, 11:13. M. Valley Mouth, Tunisia. The first bomb struck a fuel truck. A flash of orange fire bloomed upward, followed by a concussive blast that knocked 2 panzers off course. Men screamed. Another bomb hit the embankment, sending shards of stone and steel into the second wave of vehicles. Inside his tiger eye, Hauptmann Richter gripped the hatch rim as a shock wave rippled through the chassis. "This is impossible," he muttered. "They don't dive alone." Above, the Thunderbolt didn't climb. It came lower, faster. Its guns erupted, 50 cals chewing through tracks, radiators, soft targets. The Germans had no air cover. No flak active, because they weren't expecting suicide. On the ground, American side. The men of the 45th watched in stunned silence as chaos consumed the ridgeline above them. Infantrymen peered from behind shattered stones, mouths agape. One sergeant whispered, Is he alone?" McKinley dropped to his knees, helmet askew, tears streaking through the dust on his face. He stared upward. That sound, the engine roar, It wasn't war. It was deliverance. Back in the German column, smoke poured across the valley floor. An ammo truck exploded. Fire licked up a camouflage net and sent burning fabric onto the hull of a stalled panzer. Inside his wrecked command vehicle, a German lieutenant shouted into a cracked radio, "Where is Luftwaffe? Where is the air cover?" But no one answered. Not because they couldn't, but because no one had expected this. Then something absurd, something small, something devastating. As the Thunderbolt pulled up from its second dive, a small object dropped from the cockpit. It wasn't a bomb. It was a Coca-Cola bottle. It tumbled end over end and shattered against the turret of a Tiger. German soldiers stared at the glass shards as if they were alien. And in that moment, every poster they'd seen, every speech they'd heard, every lesson about the softness of American men, cracked. The pilot had no fear, no orders, just intent. The kind of intent they thought only Germans possessed. And for the first time, they felt it. Not fear of the bomb, but fear of the man who dropped it. April 3rd, 1943, 11:15 a.m. German armor line. Tunisia smoke turned the valley into a burning corridor. The lead panzer was flipped, blackened like a beetle on its back. Fuel streamed down the slope. Radiators hissed. Radios died. Inside a half-track, Unteroffizier Kurt Neumann tried to light a cigarette with shaking hands. His driver was dead. His machine gunner was screaming. The Thunderbolt made another pass. It strafed again, not wildly, but with the precision of a surgeon cutting away infected flesh. It wasn't just the destruction. It was the deliberate nature of it. Controlled, clinical, inevitable. He'd seen many American pilots. Most were sloppy, wasteful. But this one hunted. German command tent, 2 kilometers rear. Colonel Richter wiped sweat from his brow. "We underestimated him," he said, voice low. "One pilot, and the entire column halts." His aide stammered, Should we call for a full retreat?" The colonel looked down at his boots, then up at the smoking ridge. "No, we hold." But something had already broken, not in the plan, in belief, in the sky, Jack's cockpit. He was out of bombs, low on ammo. His fuel gauge danced near empty, but he circled again. One final pass, not for destruction, for presence. Down below, Germans scattered, not like soldiers, but like survivors. A few fired upward, hopeless. One even raised white cloth from a tank's antenna. Jack didn't fire. He simply flew low. So low, the heat from the burning wrecks buffeted his wings. He wanted them to see him. In the ravine, American infantry. The radio clicked back to life. "You're clear. They're pulling back." McKinley collapsed to his knees. His rifle slipped from his hand. Someone screamed, "That plane saved us!" But Jack was already gone, vanishing behind a ridgeline like a phantom, back on the German side, among the wreckage. Someone kicked at broken glass. A Coca-Cola bottle fragment glinted in the firelight. Obergefreiter Kramer stared at it, silent. He'd once been told Americans were weak. But now, his tank was gone. His friends were ash. And the man who did it flew alone, without fear, without orders, and left behind a symbol of his homeland, as casually as a signature. Inside that moment, the collapse was complete. Because what they saw in the sky wasn't recklessness. It was conviction. And conviction was something they no longer trusted in themselves. April 3rd, 1943, 11:40 a.m. German rear lines, Tunisia. A messenger ran breathless into Colonel Richter's command tent. "The assault line is gone." Richter looked up, face pale, uniform smudged with soot. "Gone?" The lead tanks are destroyed. Fuel convoy hit. No communications from the Valley column. The colonel said nothing. He just removed his gloves, one finger at a time. "One plane," he whispered. "That's all it took." Around him, the staff avoided his gaze. A captain reached for the radio. Richter stopped him. "Don't call Berlin. There's nothing left to report." McNassy Ravine, 45th Infantry Defensive Line. Smoke still rolled across the battlefield, but the gunfire had gone silent. McKinley stepped cautiously from cover, rifle raised, then lowered. The ridge was littered with twisted steel, dead tanks, and drifting ash. A medic moved past him, wide-eyed, muttering, "He saved all of us," with one run. Behind them, a captain was calling in reinforcements. American armor would arrive in 2 hours, but the battle had already ended, because someone had broken the trap before it could close. Back at Air Base, 2 hours later, Jack Reynolds stepped out of the P-47 like a ghost. His boots hit the tarmac with a hollow thud. He was covered in sweat, oil, and silence. Mechanics ran up, cheering, "You did it, Reynolds! They're calling you the Angel of McNassy." But Jack didn't respond. He walked straight to his commanding officer, saluted, and said, "I disobeyed orders, sir." The CO looked at him for a long time, then pointed at the flight log. "File your report, then we'll talk." Jack turned, eyes distant. The praise didn't reach him, because in his mind he could still hear the bombs fall, still see the valley light up, still feel the stick shudder in his hands, and he didn't know, was he a hero or just the first man to break the rules and live? Meanwhile, German lines, nightfall. An officer gathered the remains of a shattered panzer company. One soldier refused to speak. Another wept, clutching a piece of scorched canvas. No orders were given, no plans were made, because they all knew the sky no longer belonged to them. April 4th, 1943. Dawn, 45th. Infantry field tent. The air was still thick with smoke. Jack Reynolds stood outside the field hospital, hands buried in his flight jacket. Inside, soldiers rested, some bandaged, some silent, some sleeping for the first time in days. McKinley sat upright on a cot, arm in a sling, smiling faintly. He held up something as Jack entered. A cracked, soot-streaked photograph. "She's 5 months now," McKinley said. "Still looks like her mom." Jack took it gently. He recognized the photo. It had been pinned inside McKinley's helmet days before the attack. Now it was folded, worn, stained by survival. Later, Jack's quarters, temporary air base. From a burlap sack inside his flight gear, Jack pulled out a shattered glass bottle. The base of it still read Coca-Cola. He stared at it a long time. It had bounced off his cockpit floor during the dive. McKinley had handed it to him 3 weeks earlier during a fuel delay. "Good luck, Kansas," he'd joked. "Bring it back empty." Now it was empty and broken. Jack wrapped the glass in cloth and tucked it inside his flight journal. Not as a trophy, as a question. German POW interrogation, April 6th, 1943. Captured days after the failed assault, a German tank commander sat across from an American officer. He didn't resist, didn't posture, just spoke slowly, almost numbly. "One aircraft. It hit everything that mattered. We had orders. We had plans. But they meant nothing." The American leaned forward. "Why didn't you push forward?" The officer's eyes flicked up. "Because we realized something. You don't fight like us. You fight like you believe you've already won." He paused. And that was more terrifying than any bomb. Voiceover. Jack's journal entry, April 7th, 1943. They say I broke protocol, but what I really broke was the illusion that war is clean, that decisions come wrapped in orders and ranks. Sometimes they come with smoke and fire and glass falling through air. Sometimes they come when a voice on the radio sounds like home. And sometimes what falls isn't just a bomb, it's belief. April 1943. Berlin Military Briefing Room. General Lieutenant Otto Kruger flipped through the damage reports. Dozens of tanks lost. Fuel convoys obliterated. Communications severed. He read the field notes aloud, eyes narrow. Single American aircraft, engaged without authorization, caused total loss of forward momentum in Sector Red. Morale impact catastrophic. The room was silent. A staff officer broke the tension. "We underestimated them again, sir." Kruger didn't answer. He simply stared at a photo clipped to the file, a cratered valley lined with ruined panzers. Meanwhile, Detroit, Michigan. Inside a Ford assembly plant, a new P-47 Thunderbolt rolled off the line every 58 minutes. Rosie the Riveter wiped grease from her brow and reached for the next fuselage bolt. Above her, a banner read, "Victory is production." Every part was standardized. Every mechanic trained to interchange pieces without hesitation. Where Germany built planes by hand, America built them by schedule. In the time it took to repaint a Luftwaffe emblem, Detroit could make 2 new wings. German POW camp, Oklahoma, summer 1943. During interrogation, a captured Luftwaffe mechanic admitted, "We had better pilots, but they had better machines, and more of them than we could count." He described seeing U.S. convoys filled with food, trucks, fuel, even baseball gloves. "Your soldiers threw footballs before battle. We counted every round." When asked what scared him most, he didn't say bombs. He said, "Coca-Cola, in crates, everywhere." It meant you weren't just fighting to survive. You were living while fighting. Military Report, Allied Air Doctrine, May 1943. The dive by Lieutenant Reynolds was cited in a tactical re-evaluation report. Low-altitude independent attack models to be expanded. Pilot intuition authorized under specific parameters. Moral impact observed, significant. They called it psychological dominance through autonomy. The enemy saw recklessness. America saw flexibility. German diary entry, General Hans von Geyer, June 1943. They arrive with too much fuel, too many trucks, too many men. We cannot bleed them fast enough. Worse, they smile. Even their prisoners smile. Voiceover. Final note from Jack's journal. They trained me to follow. But the men I flew for, the voices I heard below, they weren't in any manual. I dove because it was right. And in that dive, a system came undone, because when one man disobeys and a nation still lifts him back into the sky, that's not luck. That's design. May 1943, U.S. Army Airfield, North Africa. The commendation came folded inside a manila envelope. No ceremony, no music, just a single slip of paper. Distinguished Flying Cross, Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, for extraordinary heroism in aerial flight. It sat untouched on his footlocker for days. Jack didn't care. He hadn't flown again since April 3rd. His plane was grounded for inspection. He was reassigned to admin duty, paperwork, reports, debriefs. He filled every form, answered every question, saluted every superior, and said almost nothing. Field letter from McKinley to his wife, April 10th, 1943. You won't believe this, honey. A single plane saved us. They called him the Angel. I knew him. Kansas boy. Quiet. Thought he was green. Turns out he had more courage than all of us put together. When the brass told him to leave us, he stayed. He didn't just fly, he fought. For us. I owe him my life, and so does our little girl. Command memo, internal, not for release. Reynolds' disobedience produced favorable outcomes. Nonetheless, recommend disciplinary note, remain in record to discourage precedent. Heroism acknowledged. Chain of command must be upheld. The margins carried a penciled comment. What if more broke rank for the right reason? But it was never signed. July 1943, Kansas, small-town post office. Anna Reynolds clutched the telegram tightly, heart racing. But it wasn't bad news. It was a photo. Jack, in front of his P-47, half smiling. Handwritten on the back, still flying, still thinking of home. Tell Dad the engine's holding together. And taped beside it, a fragment of a Coca-Cola label, burned at the edges. August 1943, somewhere in Tunisia. A new pilot arrived at the airfield. Fresh uniform, nervous smile. He unpacked quickly, flipping through a crew manual. Inside, he found a note taped to the last page. Sometimes you'll have orders. Sometimes you'll have instincts. Only one gets men home. J.R. He looked around, confused. Who's J.R.? A mechanic nearby smiled. Quiet guy, dove straight into hell once. Never talked about it, but nobody here forgets. Not even the ones who told him not to dive. April 3rd, 1965. Veterans Cemetery, Kansas. The wind swept dry across the grass. A young woman walked between the stones, a folded letter in one hand, her daughter's fingers in the other. They stopped in front of a marker. The stone was plain. No medals. No rank beyond lieutenant. Just a name. Jack Reynolds. And a single engraved line below it. He did not wait for permission. The woman knelt, placed the letter beside the headstone. Her daughter, 22 now, looked down, unsure. Is it true? She asked. He saved them? All of them? The woman nodded. He didn't tell us, but McKinley did. Every year, like a prayer. The wind rustled through the trees. Elsewhere, Germany, War Archives exhibit. In a glass case rested a burned Panzer crewman's diary. Open to a page, dated April 3rd, 1943. A single plane. He fell from the clouds like thunder. We didn't know they flew like that. We didn't know they fought like that. They say they fight for freedom. We laughed at that once. Not anymore. Beside it, a jagged glass fragment labeled simply American Coca-Cola bottle. Voiceover, final journal excerpt, undated. I wasn't a hero. I was scared, but not of dying. I was scared they'd die because I followed rules meant for yesterday, and the fight we were in was today. They called it reckless. They called it insubordination. But if you had heard what I heard, a soldier screaming for help, a voice you once shared coffee with, what would you have done? Cut to archival footage. P-47s rolling down assembly lines, Coca-Cola crates loaded into transport planes, American soldiers laughing beside their gear. Not triumphant, just human. Because victory wasn't always about firepower. Sometimes it was about one man, at one moment, who looked down at chaos and said, not today. Final image, a P-47, Thunderbolt, preserved in a Midwestern museum, hangs above a quiet room. Beneath it, etched into the floor, they were told not to dive. He dove anyway. And so we ask, what would you have done if you were him?